I'm excited by the idea of what anybody can create now. People have got the time, the tools, the energy, the passion. Also just understanding the business of making something happen, sign-offs, who you need to please, who you need to ignore. And you have to sort of learn to work either within them or around them. Understanding more about audiences is really key. And it's not necessarily about compromising your own vision. It's about kind of understanding the environment that you are going to be putting that story into. Learning about the way the world works is just super important because it can kind of really open your mind up to new and interesting approaches to stuff.
Hey, sorry to interrupt. I just have a favor to ask before we begin. If you've been enjoying these conversations and want more stories that redefine success, please do us a massive favor and hit the subscribe button over on our YouTube channel. It literally takes 2 seconds to do and is completely free. It's a small gesture, but it makes a massive difference for us as it really helps us to grow the show. And with that, let's get into the episode. All right, welcome back to the Quest for Success podcast, and thanks for tuning in once again. Today on the show, we're really excited because we're joined by Nigel Lopez-McBean, who is an Emmy-nominated producer. He's a fantastic storyteller. I've had the pleasure of sitting down and chatting with him before, and I came away super fascinated from our conversation. So I really wanted to have him on the podcast and dive a bit deeper into his story. So Nigel, thanks so much for joining us.
Yeah, absolute pleasure. I remember that conversation. We got into some quite interesting stuff.
It's always the case.
But yeah, just kind of coming on this podcast is super interesting, just to talk about the idea of success and what that means to people. Because it's not something I've ever really spent a huge amount of time thinking about. But before coming on here, I was like, what is that? And I think for me, it's always been around experiences and doing stuff more than the material thing. Because I was fortunate enough to be around a lot of people in my sort of early life who got to do exactly what they wanted to do in life. And generally speaking, if you kind of do that, all the rest of it sort of comes with it, because you show a certain energy, a certain passion, you kind of like, if you're enjoying what you're doing, like everything's easier.
Mm-hmm. So is it more about doing what you love versus like doing something just to get the financial or you want everyone else to think that you're successful? It's more about just like experiencing what is actually meaningful to you.
Yeah, 100%. Absolutely that. And just also trying to find new and different avenues. I think I've always sort of probably treated life as a bit of a sort of almost like a computer game, because I'm a big gaming type person where there's always another level, there's always somewhere else you can go.
Yep.
I think that's kind of how I've sort of approached it. And also I think I've always been very keen to take opportunities. And I've been fortunate enough again that those opportunities have given me the chance to sort of live around the world in different places. And when you do that, you kind of learn a lot about a new environment, but more than anything else, you probably learn more about yourself. Mm-hmm. And so I think that's been really helpful to me in over time, just kind of having an overall confidence about who I am and what I do and what I'm able to achieve and all of that kind of stuff. And that to me is what sort of constitutes success. I think if you can be kind of passionate and confident about what you do, that's not a place that everybody gets to. And I think having discovered that, it's just opened up so many different avenues, access to people, things, just general stuff that wouldn't have happened otherwise.
Yeah. And if your definition of success is all about, doing something that you're passionate about, what is it that you're passionate about?
I'm passionate about storytelling. Is a huge passion of mine from like being a kid. I was always interested in like narratives. I was a massive reader. Like anything to do with storytelling, film, storytelling, and music. I kind of loved all of it. And that sort of kind of led my educational path through that. And then I started my work career at the BBC, which was just a really amazing place to kind of learn about like mechanics of storytelling, like how it actually happens. And that was like that was the first environment where I'd sort of managed to understand about the link between telling stories and commerce, making money, all of that kind of stuff. Sort of prior to that, I think I've been really just lost in kind of like the art of storytelling, what makes an amazing story, creativity, all that fun stuff. But slowly getting into the colder, more business arts of why certain things happen and certain things don't, and what it takes to actually make TV and what it takes to actually bring a book to fruition. These kind of things, super fascinating, super fascinating.
Yeah. And I suppose going back to your kind of early years, were you surrounded by any other storytellers? Like, were either of your parents into this sort of space, or like what kind of sparked it other than reading?
So my parents are Jamaican, and the storytelling culture in Jamaican culture is deep, like really, really deep. And I was basically surrounded by a lot of family members that as you all know, in every culture, there's just all sorts of insanity that happens. And it just so happens that a lot of the people in my family were really good performative storytellers, and I listened to a lot of them as I was a kid. I had one uncle in particular who was just incredible. And also, my mom was a massive watcher of. I didn't realize it until much later, but she was a really big and diverse watcher of TV and film. So she would watch like anything, and just as a kid watching virtually anything with her kind of opened me up and exposed me to a lot of stuff that I wouldn't ordinarily. And I think that's kind of what sort of sparked it all. Also, I think there's a within Jamaican culture, there's a real culture around just entertainment and just kind of expression and all of that. So I was kind of naturally attracted to all of it in lots of different ways.
So Nigel, can you take us to the beginning of your early childhood? Were you grow up in a family of many children, or how that worked? Where did you kind of live and grew up?
Yeah, so I grew up in Derbyshire in England, and in a sort of pretty working class community. It was where I was living was a really sort of interesting ethnic mix: Indians, Pakistanis, Chinese, Jamaicans, Africans, Eastern Europeans, the whole diverse mix. And I think that had a big effect on me as well, because I got to learn about, so many amazing stories and ideas and stuff from my friends who were from those different cultures. My family setup was super interesting because my parents had me quite late. So there's a 15-year age gap between me and my brother.
Oh, wow.
So I always used to joke that because of the sort of the age and the seniority of my parents when I was a sort of teenager, because they were like significantly older than me. It was almost like the relationship between me and my brother was a bit like a small business. So my dad would have been the MD, and my brother was like my line manager. So he was the sort of go-to person to talk to about stuff, but I didn't really have a huge amount to do with the boss man. Yeah. And my dad ran post offices, so he was a postmaster. So he was always away at very early, crazy times. Yeah. Time and timings and punctuality were just a massive thing in my household for obvious reasons. But watching him was a really kind of early. It was a really sort of early view into kind of like what entrepreneurs actually do. So, because the worst form, I think the worst and most difficult form of entrepreneurship is any that's performed by any sort of first generation immigrant to a new country, because it's just difficult. It's a weird environment. You're having to battle not only yourself but the culture that you might not fully understand. It's a really, really difficult thing to do. And watching a lot of people in my community from Caribbean backgrounds, Indians, Pakistanis, all kind of battling the same thing was like always kind of, I think that had quite an effect on me. Just going, as much as respect as I have for that, that's not what I want to be doing. Like, I don't want to be working that hard. So childhood and family was pretty normal. Mum and dad were there. I would call my early years sort of typical first generation immigrant, where there was a fairly big gap between what went on inside my house and what happened when I left the front door. It was like, you guys understand, it's like living in two different worlds, and that two different world situation is something that kind of I understand really well, and often have really great relationships with other people that understand that really well as well.
And then what was your first intro into, the kind of professional storytelling or creative space?
I would say I wrote and directed a school play.
Wow.
I can't remember which year it was, called The Grapefruit Girl, and I wrote the whole thing, starred in it, and directed it, and I would say to this day it's still the most difficult thing I've ever done. Because the stress of putting on that production, keeping a bunch of people happy, actually having to do it sort of like 4 times over the course of a week, rehearsals, other people, just understanding that there was elements of the story that didn't necessarily work when other people that weren't me were doing it. All of that stuff was probably the first kind of like, as difficult as that was, I actually really enjoyed the process, and I actually really enjoyed how people felt afterwards as well.
And then what did that trigger inside you? Was that the kind of leading cause for you going and studying something in that space, or like what was the next kind of chapter?
So in typical kind of immigrant fashion, my parents kind of said, no, you don't want to be doing that creative drama type thing. You don't want that. So I ended up going to uni and doing politics instead.
Oh, wow.
But weirdly, going through that process again only sort of fueled me to go, storytelling is where it's at. Mm-hmm. Like, this whole politics thing is just a different form of storytelling.
Absolutely.
And some of those stories and narratives have the power to destroy lives. So that was kind of, I kind of did that. It was great. It was great learnings, but more than anything else, it was like, that was to keep my sort of mom off my back more than anything else. So I had a sort of an idea of kind of how to get into the creative world and do it in a way that my mom would probably take seriously. And that was like, I just thought to myself, well, if I can work at the BBC, she knows what that is. Yeah. It's like a big proper company. And that would give me my opportunity to kind of learn. What was interesting was prior to that, I actually did some internships. So I did some internships in publishers and a bunch of other kind of creative businesses. And what was fascinating was those internships were unpaid. Right? Yeah. Of course, most people who work in the creative sector know that unpaid work and those sorts of things isn't unusual when people are trying to to break in. But culturally, I could not explain to my parents why I was working for free. Like, they just so there was a point where I had to basically effectively lie to them about what I was doing. I was like, oh, I'm kind of working here, and I had to actually say I was getting paid for it, because they just wouldn't have been able to kind of comprehend it. And it's weird, because that sort of experience around trying to get into creative worlds in which people like me had probably never been the pathway or the person that was designed to walk that road. It was just super interesting. Working in these organizations whose recruitment was so linear that they'd never once thought about how limiting the idea of having people work for free as a way in was.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I do remember having one conversation at a place that I worked where I sort of raised the fact that it was kind of a bit ridiculous that I was effectively working 4 days a week and wasn't being paid like anything. And remember, this business that got really offended, which tells you everything about how they recruit, how comfortable they are with the sorts of people that they recruit, and the often comfortable backgrounds of the people that they recruit. Yeah. And I think it's still a problem to this day, which is fascinating.
Yeah. So the BBC was your first paid job?
Yeah.
How did you manage to get into BBC?
Trying to think how it started. I actually went through an agency, and this agency sort of said, "Would you be interested in doing this?" I said yes. I ended up turning up for a couple of days. Again, worked for free, just to kind of like show that I fit into the culture and all that sort of stuff. And my original start was actually in. I was supposed to be starting in announcing sort of TV programs, so I would have been like the vocal link between programs, but that didn't kind of work out the way it was supposed to, and I ended up working in the marketing department instead for BBC Worldwide, and that was really great, because it was back then BBC Worldwide was the arm of the BBC that was the commercial part. So if you have any idea about how the BBC is organised, it's effectively a public funded organisation. Everyone in the UK pays a licence fee to watch television, and that basically forms the bulk of their revenues, along with some support from government. But with all the which allows them to have an amazing output of content, podcasts, TV shows, you name it, they do it. But what was called BBC Worldwide back then was designed to basically sell these content properties around the world, region by region, hence why they have such an amazing legacy of programming across the world, because they literally have a huge corporate arm that was designed to sort of make that happen. And as I say, that was a really early introduction into, you can do this creative thing and also get paid for it. And if it goes really well, you can get paid for it really well. Was kind of like,
there's opportunity.
And I want to understand that, because to me, it's, a little bit of a tightrope, right? Like pure creative storytelling and then storytelling for a marketing purpose. And like, I want to understand what that experience kind of taught you about that.
I think the main thing is they've kind of morphed into each other, because to cut through what you do has got to be just good or interesting, or it's got to connect or compel or do something. It's got to basically drive or fire some sort of emotion. I think the sort of gap between like the creation of original content and content for marketing I think the thing that I learned was that very often the people that work on both sides of that equation kind of use the same production companies, strategies, the way stuff's built is very, very similar. So in terms of creative process, while one might be seen as more pure, they both come with their own challenges around being able to make what you want to make within the system that you're in. So when you make original content TV, whatever, that's one very specific system, and the creation for marketing is another very specific system with its own, its own world, its own partners, its own way of doing stuff. So learning the difference between the two was really cool, and that kind of set the basis for a bunch of stuff I did later on, where I was seamlessly working across the two worlds and trying to sort of merge the best versions of those worlds together. It's really fun.
Do you see any difference nowadays compared to those days?
In terms of?
The change in the storytelling and the marketing?
I think the main one I would say is the user-generated nature of a lot of stuff now. That anyone can be a content creator, anyone can have a platform. Years ago, that absolutely wasn't the case, and it's been interesting to see the gap between the sort of new world and the old world, and also now how they influence each other. So, for instance, if you watch broadcast sport, for instance, is a really good example, where now you have so many amazing content creators online who say, if you're interested in football, there's a ton of people that are doing football analysis, podcasts, conversations, comedy, like content around football. The scale of audiences those people are getting has actually had an effect on the way that football's presented in terms of punditry and analysis. And now we're even at the stage where, YouTube content creators, you're seeing them on major traditional platforms, NBC, Sky, this kind of thing. So it's kind of come full circle, because there was this fear that anyone could become a content creator. Then anyone did become a content creator, and now the major traditional broadcasters are now employing these content creators to keep their model relevant.
How do you feel like as a creative person, right? Like, you were quite unique then, because you had a special gift that you can come up with stories, right? And now, as you mentioned, like anyone can create these stories. How do you feel about it?
I think it's great. I think I'm excited by the idea of what anybody can create now. People have got the time, the tools, the energy, the passion. I think that there's a lot of the creative world in a lot of ways has been heavily gatekept for a long, long time. For a ton of reasons. Some of them have been cultural, some of those have been commercial. But I think what's happening now is I don't feel threatened by it. I think, say, if you use AI as an example, I think that there's a lot of people in the creative world that are incredibly threatened by AI. And I totally understand why you would feel that way. My take is that if you genuinely perceive yourself as a creative person with a creative mind, it's a creative challenge to harness in some way. And it's about finding your own use case for the sort of technology that's been presented to you. So I don't have the same concerns that a lot of my peers do, and I have really great conversations with a whole bunch of people who feel very differently about it than I do. I also think there's an element of how you feel about all of this has a lot to do with your position within the industry and how you came into it. So I think if you are from a background or lineage where you were probably always going to work in this world. You might always going to be a filmmaker. Your dad was a producer or whatever. This all feels a lot more existential to you because this is not how it's supposed to play out. Right? You're supposed to have your pathway to greatness the same as the person before you did, and this is all a bit of an inconvenience. For someone like me, I'm a bit like, oh, great, a new avenue, a kind of different way, and a new door to kind of like come through, somewhere that might not be gate kept. And so I have quite a opportunistic, positive sort of frame on things.
Yeah, I really like that. And I want to kind of go to some of the work that you've done since the BBC. You've worked on projects for Netflix, for Optus. What has kind of working with those big kind of clienteles taught you? Because I imagine it's quite a different process.
Yeah, you work with a lot of people. There's a lot of cooks in the kitchen, and you get used to that. I think you have to kind of quell your ego and become a really good collaborator. The collaboration thing was for a time really, really important. Weirdly, I think the collaborative thing is less important now, whilst people have got greater access, because you can create your own world around yourself now if you know what you're doing and you've got access to the right tools. But I think so working with lots of people, also just understanding the business of making something happen, sign-offs, who you need to please, who you need to ignore, making all of those kind of decisions. Like every sort of major enterprise kind of has its own quirks, and you have to sort of learn to work either within them or around them. And I think I learned a lot about what I now sort of call the like systems for creativity, right? So every time you do something interesting, you have to do it within some sort of system. And sometimes that system is going to be really helpful and really beneficial and really complementary to what you're already doing. And other times those systems are just going to fight you every inch of the way. You just need to sort of have a good understanding of what you're entering into and how best to navigate it. I think one of the things I've spent a bunch of time doing is sort of mentoring and talking to people that kind of want to get into the industry and stuff. And I'm very keen to make sure that they don't have an idealistic view of like the world that you're about to enter. It's about, you have to have quite a high level of emotional intelligence, I think, to navigate all the stuff that's going on around you.
You mentioned that like systematized creativity. To me, that doesn't make sense, because for me, creativity is free flowing, new ideas, just like very free flowing. Whereas when you say systematize, you're kind of boxing that in. Can you explain that to me a little bit more?
Yeah. So if you we use something like Hollywood as an example. Hollywood is a very complex and deliberately constructed operating system for a very particular sort of creativity, right? Which we know what it looks like, we know what it sounds like, from all of it, from the PR end of things to what you actually see on screen, like you know what all of that is. To succeed within that environment, you have to know how to work within that system, which is why literally the industry's talked about the fact it has a star system, right? So it literally tells you that this isn't a free-flowing creative thing. This is a cold business kind of like sausage factory that we're going to put you through, and we can kind of predict what's going to happen to you, where it's going to happen to you, how it's going to happen to you at every stage. And I think the whole idea of systems and creativity has probably got even more mainstream now that so many, not just creators but marketers as well, are effectively having to deliver creativity for platforms, for systems. So as a result of that, you kind of have to deliver things in certain ways, in certain formats, to understand what sort of beats work, what kind of hooks you need to engage an audience. So whilst the idea of creativity is this kind of like amorphous, free-flowing thing, when everyone's having to do it for systems, that turns it into something slightly different.
And was there a project that you look back on and you were like, that was kind of one of my core turning points?
There wasn't one particular campaign, but I think I did a bunch of work back in sort of 2017 with Snapchat.
Oh, right.
And as part of the work I was doing in the US, I was part of a team that did a deal with them to create effectively vertically shot, very short TV series, episodic TV. So each episode would be, call it 2.5 minutes. And I think there was two things I learned out of that, because you were literally delivering original creative to be put inside a very specific technological box, which was going to deliver it in a very different way, which was like vertical at that time, was just the relationship between data and creativity, and how data can inform that creativity, and just how much you could learn from data. And it was, I always knew that the social media platforms had a huge advantage around understanding of kind of like behavioral intent and all of that, but it's not until you're actually really close to it and getting to the back end and you're getting reports and seeing what you're actually seeing that you start to go, oh, okay, wow.
Yeah.
That, and also just the scale of eyeballs. So, it's just really crazy to test something. You might test a piece of creative and then find out that 14 million people watched it for more than 20 seconds.
Wow.
That's kind of difficult to solve.
Yeah. So, Nigel, you also move around, right? So you move to US and then to Australia. They're more to do with work related?
Yeah, more than anything else, just opportunity. I moved to Australia a bunch of years ago, and that was just purely built out of I came here on holiday, really enjoyed it, found out I would be eligible for a visa to come back here and work, and did so, and then just enjoyed it, met my wife, her family, all of that. So that was kind of me sort of here, and then moving to States was an opportunity to go and build a small content studio with a couple of Emmy-winning storytellers, a bunch of guys called the Duplass Brothers, who are just an amazing mix of kind of creative purity and just commercial discipline. And that was really an opportunity for me to go out there. I'd always wanted to work in the States at some point. Go out there, learn, and just get really engrossed in this whole storytelling thing. There's just kind of no better place to do it than in somewhere like LA, where you get to meet, amazing people all the time, super interesting people.
What was like working with Mark and Jay Duplass? Amazing,
really great. It's interesting working with teams that are siblings.
Yeah,
doesn't happen all the time, because number one, most people can't or couldn't. So to see two people who are able to merge their kind of personal and professional lives together in that way is kind of super interesting. I got to see the advantages of doing that close up.
Yeah.
And I realized that more people creatively should probably, if they can, work with someone in their family, because just the benefit of being able to have more than one person who's had the same cultural experiences as you, it's like it's bigger than, it's almost like, it's like having 4 people, not 2. Just the ability to know that you're going to think very similar on certain things creatively. You're going to have a really good idea of what that other person's going to think because you just know them so well.
Yeah.
The ability to kind of finish each other's work and also have a really amazing understanding of what somebody else is good at. So your role's about who does what. If you're in a sibling, you just know that better than any business partnership.
You've worked in and with some incredible, people, incredible industries. I want to know, like, now looking back, what do you think is kind of the secret to engaging audiences?
That's a really, really good question, and it's sort of multi-layered. A while ago, I would have said being good, like delivering something interesting, engaging, compelling that speaks to people. You don't actually need to be that good anymore, because if you have an understanding of algorithms, people, systems, audiences, you can kind of deliver what people want. If you consider, if you go on virtually any platform, we'll take YouTube as an example. You go on there, most of the content you would never consider to be like particularly amazing, but it's compelling, it speaks to you, it works, right? So I think that the which goes back to the secret to engaging audiences is just to be genuine, delivering something that's genuinely compelling. And compelling probably now trumps good, because to be compelling you don't necessarily have to be good. And I think what we're kind of beginning to see is there's a lot of people that have grown up from their kind of earliest years deeply embedded in user-generated content. So it's always been about, social platforms, YouTube, all of it. My son's a really great example. He's like nearly 13 years old, and his creative universe, what he likes, what he thinks is cool, who he listens to, and his view of the world is vastly different to mine. So just basic things like, for instance, he's grown up in a world where the majority of the content that he watches of any scripted variety is probably going to be Japanese or Korean.
Oh, wow.
And then as a result of what's happening in the United States over the past sort of 8 years or longer, he doesn't perceive the US as being particularly cool. It's not the core of his kind of cultural experience. It's not like previous generations where, everything cool that hip and happening was coming from America. He doesn't feel that way at all. So I think what you're beginning to see is this kind of like weird breakdown of what people perceive as being good, and it's not necessarily the things that people that make lots of money would want you to believe were good. So if you consider, content creators and the like, the majority of them are, completely independent. Like, they do what they want, say what they want, they control their own audiences, all of that. That's a world away from a system like Hollywood, for instance, which has been all about controlling every single element of the pipeline, from talent to like where you actually go and see film and TV.
For sure. And now we're kind of in a world where we're moving towards the short format era. I want to understand from your experience, how do you be a great storyteller in a short format?
So it's partly that compelling thing, and there's still no shortcuts. Just because it's a shorter format doesn't mean that the construction and architecture of it can be any less considered than if you were making something for an hour and a half. It just changes the nature of how you have to present it and how quickly you need to get into a story to make it work. Some people are going to be really amazing at it. Some people it's not going to be for them. But it's interesting that the short form genre has kind of gone through a bunch of different evolutions. So there was probably the first was really around the kind of advent of social media and video and all of that, which turned into a bit of a mess. And then there was probably a period around 2016, 2018 where a lot of people were trying to play with this idea of kind of premium short form storytelling. So it was basically delivering what you're used to at a really high level, kind of expensively made, but shorter form. So you might remember that business that was around for a little while called Quibi. They were short form. They only lasted kind of 6 months during the pandemic. But that was a kind of first attempt at a sort of premium short form thing. And then there's always been like a kind of prejudice against short form content by streaming platforms. They don't particularly love it, so it's often very difficult to sell. So I think where it's really, really found its home as being kind of like all the vertical platforms, which has now sort of created a new standard for content that sort of 9 by 16 that we're all kind of so used to seeing now. I think that's basically where it's going to be for foreseeable.
Yeah, Nigel. So going back to your journey, you decided to start get into your own business. What made that decision? Like, why did you decide to go your own path and starting your own company?
Yeah, so my first real attempt at doing that was when I went over to the US to start Donut, which was the business I started with the Dupas brothers. And that was my first kind of attempt at executing a lot of stuff that was going on in my head. So I'd been in a lot of situations where I'd been sort of really passionate, deeply invested in what I was doing, but ultimately I got paid for the bit I'd done, but the bigger thing I wasn't part of. And it's a weird thing when you watch something that kind of becomes like extraordinarily successful and you go, I was part of that, but I didn't get all of that. So really it was a kind of beginning of seeing if I could like actually do it, see if I could execute all the things that I had going on in my head, seeing what like actual entrepreneurship at the front end was really like and whether it was for me. And I sort of probably did it in the most difficult way, which was starting a business in a country that I hadn't worked in before.
Yeah.
So you have to learn about all the cultural elements. You need to understand about the legal environment that you're working in and all of that kind of stuff. And then also trying to sell in an environment where culturally you're still having to learn about. But it was great. I really loved the freedom of it and the connectivity. It doesn't always work, but the connectivity between effort and reward. So there's just something really rewarding about working on something for a long time or trying to get a contract or wanting to work with a certain partner and all of that. And then when it comes off, it really feels meaningful. Yeah. Right? We did that.
Yeah. So did you have to pitch the concept to Duplass brothers for them to come on board?
Yeah. So the backstory was I actually got to meet them prior to all of this in the US while I was working on another project, and they were super interested in just the advertising and marketing world, and had just a really high level understanding of what went on in this world, and that's kind of like independent filmmakers and stuff, like where there was an opportunity for crossover in terms of talent or ideas and all of that. So sort of went away and came up with a pitch to go back to them on how we could potentially collaborate on trying to find new and interesting ways to deliver sort of indie filmmaking or independent storytelling in for brands and platforms, and also be able to do that at a studio level in interesting ways. So, for instance, the idea of making something for a Disney or whatever that might sit on YouTube, these kind of ideas. So it was effectively a studio that allowed us all to kind of experiment. So it was allowed them to experiment with, deals outside of their existing kind of major TV situations, and sort of gave me the opportunity to look at ways that we could do interesting things with platforms and brands and all of that. So it was really great.
And I know another thing which you're quite passionate about is, diversity in the creative industry. I want to understand, what do you think the core issue is? Like, why isn't there enough diversity in the creative space?
Yeah, that's a really big question. I think a lot of it's a symptom of culture. I think in a lot of creative spaces there isn't a known pathway in. It's not like you join a graduate scheme or there's some thing that you can kind of go, okay, I'm going to excel to try and get onto that, and that will be a pathway in. It's often very sort of opaque. It's often based around, relationships, who you know. There are huge elements of it that don't pay particularly well, particularly during the early years. A lot of the places that you'd want to do it are based in major cities, London, Sydney, New York, LA, these kind of places. These are not cheap places to live. They're really expensive. So there's just an awful lot of, I think, diverse talent who don't get the opportunity. And also, again, I think culture plays a part on both ends, because similar to the experience I had, there's also a lot of parents basically going, you don't want to do that. You want to earn something that's gonna make you, money that we can understand.
Yeah.
And also, I just think as well, and I think this goes for a lot of businesses, but probably the creative sector more so than anywhere else. People have a tendency to pick, employ, and choose people that are kind of like them. And when I say that, I'm not just talking about race or anything like that. I'm talking about also just overall culture. People that feel like them. So people that might have been in the same circles, people that might have been on the same jobs, people that are kind of known in some way. So you add all of that together, it's the barriers to entry can be pretty high.
And so what are you trying to do, or what can the industry do to kind of fix that if it's more of a cultural problem?
Two things. So I think the cultural element of it is difficult to fix.
Yeah.
Sorry, I get it right. It's difficult to fix, but weirdly, fixing it is very achievable, right? So whilst it's a difficult thing to do, and it will be difficult for them to do, the way to do it is actually well known, and that is basically diverse leadership. Because the best thing about the creative industry is the people that run it and people that are at a high level have an enormous amount of power. So you only need to have a few people in key decision-making areas to be able to affect a lot of change. And then I think the other element is, everything that's created is built around the idea of what's good, what's right, somebody's taste, right? So if you watch something on a streaming platform, for that thing to have got there, it would have gone through numerous different hands, groups, thoughts, and there was a whole bunch of people that deemed that thing good enough to appear on a streaming platform. Right? I think where we're going to have to get to is we're going to have to do two things. We're going to have to start thinking more broadly and more widely about what gets made and why. And then also getting better, which is part of what I do in my other world, Narrative Muse, is start to understand the gap between story and audiences better. So one of the things you'll often hear, and you would have heard for generations in any room where someone's trying to sell a story, is someone will say, who would watch that or who would read that? So over time, what that's always done is it's made it's allowed them to be a very kind of exclusive, relatively small set of ideas and stories that the world gets presented, because those are the things that are seen as being kind of good or interesting enough to enough people to make it worthwhile. I think in a world of a zillion people, the one thing that we need to get better at is, if I create a story, who's actually interested in this? How do I find out the people that are interested in this? And that's the technology I've been working on at Narrative Muse, where we're using data and insights to really begin to understand what it is somebody likes about a story and what someone could potentially like about a story, to give people a much more detailed and clearer way of being able to understand the potential audience or value of a story before you've even made it.
So, but Nigel, do you think if you're really focusing on creating stories for what audience want, do you lose your creativity? Because creativity is very much imagination, right? Do you see that you have to compromise?
I don't see it as a compromise. I think if you're going to make something, it's helpful to have a basic understanding of who would want it, who would like it. Otherwise, ultimately, you're making stuff for the sake of making stuff, which is great. There's value in that, but you can't credibly expect to get any sort of meaningful financial return out of that. I think one of the things that really does need to change, and there's a lot of people that do feel this way, is understanding more about audiences is really key. And it's not necessarily about compromising your own vision. It's about kind of understanding the environment that you are going to be putting that story into, which can be helpful in lots of ways. On one level, it could potentially help you with the way that you frame a story, but usually it's going to be more about the way you position an audience to find this story, because that's the big, meaningful and difficult challenge with storytelling at the moment. It's discoverability. So much amazing content, so many amazing ideas, but the discoverability element of it is really lacking. So everyone's been through that situation where you've gone on a streaming platform which feels like a world of endless choice, and you've kind of just gone through looking for something. You can't really find anything that really speaks to you, because the algorithm is working off a version it thinks it knows of you based on what you may have watched or read in the past. Where we need to get to is the algorithm what we need to get to is you having a greater input into that algorithm, and it being able to deliver stories that are more compelling and interesting to you in a genuine way, and also being able to know enough about you to take you off into interesting places and spaces.
Yeah.
If you think about how weird and organic discovery used to be before we were dealing with algorithms, would be personal recommendations. You'd be running into stuff, you go to a bookshop, browse, video shop, all of that.
Yeah.
A lot of that kind of random discoverability is kind of where we need to, I think that's the next layer of being able to kind of excite people.
And I want to understand a little bit more about your your Emmy nomination when you were working for Disney. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so it's a really fun time. Worked on a show called Shook, which was a young adult series that was the basic idea behind it was to create a Disney Channel type show, but shot and created with a real sort of indie sensibility, with a cast that was led by a social media influencer. And the idea being that the content would be given away for free on YouTube to drive audience and further interest in Disney Channel and all of that. So the idea was to kind of create this show that was multi-platform. So every element of it was original. So the soundtrack behind it was an original soundtrack that was created specifically for it. It was released on YouTube. There was a range of influencer talent to sort of drive reach within it, and it was really, really fun to make. So making anything around the world of dance is just kind of fun to start with, and it was kind of a bit of a life privilege to sort of spend a bit of time kind of in that sort of LA dance scene, working with people in that world, and just a lot of fun. But it was a really great learning experience working with a sort of major studio, understanding how that world works, how something actually gets from being an idea to being made, and just also understanding the sort of the more business elements of it, just business of creativity. And it was amazing. It was an amazing honor to come out the other side and get a nomination for the work we did. It's a really crazy year, and it's something I'm pretty proud of.
And I want to understand, a lot of our listeners, young as well. What advice would you give to a young aspiring creator?
Understand how the world of creativity works. And I don't say that to kind of be boring or to diminish from anyone's like creative passion or desire, but you can be the most amazing creator the world has ever seen, but if you don't have a basic understanding of how what you've made would potentially get to an audience and why that happens, it's going to be really difficult. So learning about the way the world works is just super important, because it can kind of really open your mind up to new and interesting approaches to stuff. So it's one of the things I talk about a lot with people that I sort of mentor. It's often the crux of the conversation I have. It's less about creativity, which that's what they do. They don't have to worry about any of that. It's more about, okay, now you've made this thing, what next? Right? How are you going to promote it? How are you going to gain eyeballs to it? If you want to sell it, what's your plan to do that? Have you got the right sort of pitch? Sales materials, how are you looking after yourself? Do you realize that this thing might potentially take a year? Just a whole world of kind of inside stuff that I think it's important to know about. It's just like, if you're going to become a professional footballer, you kind of need to know the pathway. Yeah.
So Nigel, what are you working on right now? Anything exciting?
Yeah, the thing I'm really, really enjoying working is working with Narrative Muse, our discovery startup. So again, as mentioned, just working on technology that's built to help to change discoverability and to give content executives a much better understanding of often unseen links between story and audience, and where market opportunity might be found before you've actually committed budget to make stuff. And that, I think that is also ties into a bunch of other stuff that I'm doing at the moment as well. I'm also started to develop an idea for a workshop that I've just started to roll out around the idea of the taste trap. And basically the taste trap is what I call it's almost like the invisible architecture that shapes visibility, what we get seen, why certain things get made, why certain things don't. And just thinking about, if you consider that taste has been decided by random people, editors, producers, executives, forever. Most of us don't really know who any of those people are, but they are the people that filter what gets made. And then now we've kind of moved from that to a world in which everything's now dictated by algorithms, which have been also trained on that same yesterday's behavior. So we're on this weird kind of endlessly repeating loop of taste built by a very particular small set of people that we still now live with, and is being probably promoted to us even more aggressively. So just think about ways to break that loop, and also sort of beginning to build, just go back to the Narrative Muse project, is that we're building discovery systems that are designed to be kind of more intelligent, more transparent, more built around actual human beings, as opposed to algorithms that are basically designed for commercial and retail imperatives.
So fascinating.
Amazing.
And I suppose, Nigel, we could talk for hours, but looking back on this journey that we've spoken about, given your definition of success was largely about, building experience, having passion versus, the monetary side of things, do you feel successful?
Yeah, very hugely. Just by virtue of the fact that you guys think that my journey is interesting enough to have a conversation about, probably says that. And I also realize now, just as I spend more time trying to kind of share what I know and share my experiences and talk to all sorts of people, emerging creators, sometimes it takes the reaction of other people to kind of understand the value of what you've done. And I think I now feel a certain responsibility, because I now know there's a lot of people whose whole dream is to basically be in a lot of the situations that I found myself in. So now I'm able to kind of, give people an idea or a steer or a sense of how you can make that happen. And also, crucially, when you get there, what it's actually like. Because again, there's a lot of situations where you can be careful what you wish for. A lot of people strive for certain things, and they get there and they suddenly go, this isn't what I thought it was going to be. Not really. So, so I think I do feel successful. I feel kind of sort of spiritually and creatively successful, and being able to sort of share that with other people, I think it's really cool. I think that's the whole point of it.
Absolutely.
Excellent.
I'm really glad that you feel that way. And I suppose throughout our conversation, I've been trying to jot down what I think are some of your core traits that have led to your success. And I'd like to share them. I think the first one is you take opportunities, whether it was from, a young age, taking those unpaid gigs just to get your foot in the door, or moving around to different countries to, get on those projects, starting your own thing. You really just dive in, take opportunities. And I think that's a really important trait. Otherwise you get stuck in this kind of decision paralysis rut. You just go in and you take the decisions.
100%, yeah.
The next one is, obviously it's your job. You're an incredible communicator. And I think you do that through your storytelling. And it's just having conversations with great communicators. It makes you understand, it is such a fundamental trait, being able to tell a story and engage with an audience. It makes a conversation a lot more engaging.
Amazing.
The next one is your curiosity. Understanding more about, what you're doing now, trying to understand about audiences, context, and how that really shapes people. Not just kind of following the traditional route. You're really curious about how things work and what you can do to kind of improve them. And then the last one that I've got is you've very much got this give back mentality, whether it's the work you're doing, in the diversity space, trying to, kind of lead and forge a path for other creators from different backgrounds, or whether it's now or this mentoring that you're doing. I think it's very much ingrained in who you are, trying to give back and help the next Nigels coming through.
Yeah. We don't need any more Nigels, but yeah, I know where you're going. But yeah, it's really important to me because I didn't have it. So, I kind of spent a lot of time sort of like trying to figure things out, wondering why certain things worked, didn't, this kind of thing. And I would say, now I kind of have the blueprint that I wish somebody had given me. Mm-hmm. So I'm kind of always like super happy to share where I can.
Yeah, I love that.
Thank you, Nigel. I think we've seen a creativity or storytelling in a different perspective altogether in this conversation. And thank you for sharing your journey. It's fascinating.
If people want to find out more about you or learn about the work that you're doing, where's the best place for them to learn a bit more?
Yeah, so online, nigellopezmcbean.com, you can find out kind of most things about me there. And also narrativemuse.com, which is my story and audience discoverability platform. It's definitely worth having a look at narrativemuse.com. Super interesting. And we're going to be doing some really fun things this year with that.
Excited to check it out. Nigel, thank you so much. And for our listeners, if you've gotten something out of today's episode, it would mean the world if you could like and subscribe so that we can share our message with more and more people. And if you want to see more of our inspirational content, you can do so over on our website, thequestforsuccesspodcast.com. And with that, we'll catch you guys in the next episode. Thanks for listening.